You need to take your people south, past the canyon. We can't have you camping here.
The search party had given up. The tracks vanished into the frozen canyon, and the sun was setting. But then, a lone cowboy stepped forward and told the grieving mother, "Don't follow me, follow my horse." No one knew the secret this animal was hiding or the shocking reason he knew exactly where her daughter was buried. The sun dipped behind the jagged edges of Devil's Peak, casting long and jagged shadows across the valley. A thick mist had crawled down from the heights, swallowing the narrow trails and the red rock canyons. In the center of the search camp, a fire flickered, but it offered no comfort to Alawan. Her 7-year-old daughter had been gone for 24 hours. The girl had vanished while picking berries near the edge of the woods, and since then, the world had become a silent and terrifying place. The local sheriff stood by his truck, shaking his head. He had brought the best tracking dogs from the next county, but even they were useless. The dogs had spent the afternoon pacing in circles and whining. The scent had been wiped away by the cold mountain dew and the shifting winds. The search party was exhausted and losing hope. The men spoke in low voices about the mountain lions that hunted in the caves and the steep drops that could claim a life in a single misstep. They told Alawan that the search would have to stop until morning, but everyone knew that a small child could not survive another night in the freezing air. Just as the sheriff was about to call off the men, the sound of slow hooves echoed against the stone. A lone cowboy rode into the light of the fire. He was a tall man with a face lined by years of wind and sun. He rode a buckskin horse that looked as rugged as the mountains themselves. The animal was covered in old scars and moved with a strange, predatory grace. The cowboy did not say a word at first. He simply looked up at the dark peaks and watched the way the mist swirled around the rocks. While the other men saw a wall of shadows, he seemed to be reading a map that no one else could see. The sheriff stepped forward and put a hand on his belt. He told the newcomer that the search was over for the night and that a horse was no better than a bloodhound on cold stone. The cowboy, whose name was Silas, did not look at the lawman. He kept his eyes on Alawan. He saw the deep pain in her face and the way she clutched a small piece of her daughter's clothing. Silas climbed down from his buckskin horse and patted the animal's thick neck. He told the mother that his horse, Ghost, was not like the others. Silas explained that Ghost had been lost as a foal and raised by a pack of wolves in the high country. The horse did not think like a prey animal. He did not look for footprints or scents left on the grass. Instead, he listened for the rhythm of the mountain. Silas claimed that the horse could feel the vibration of a heartbeat through the very rocks beneath his hooves. The men in the search party laughed. They called it a fairy tale and told Silas he was wasting everyone's time. They said the mountain was too vast and the girl was too small to be found by such a strange method. Alawan walked past the sheriff and stood in front of the buckskin. The horse turned its head and looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold a deep and ancient wisdom. There was no fear in the animal, only a steady and calm focus. Alawan felt a spark of hope for the first time since the sun had gone down. She told the sheriff to stay behind. She looked at Silas and whispered that she would trust the horse. Silas nodded and told her to stay close and watch the animal's ears. He promised her that if her daughter was still breathing, Ghost would find her. They left the flickering light of the campfire behind and stepped into a world of total darkness. The canyon was a maze of narrow passages and towering walls that seemed to lean in from both sides. Silas sat tall in the saddle, but he did not pull on the reins. He kept his hands low and let the buckskin horse choose every step. He whispered to Alawan that the horse was now the leader and they were simply along for the ride. The only sound was the rhythmic clicking of hooves against the dry creek bed and the occasional howl of the wind high above the rim. As they moved deeper into the labyrinth, the path became nearly impossible to follow. They reached a point where the trail split into 3 different directions. To a human eye, each path looked identical and equally dangerous. Alawan felt her heart race as she looked at the jagged rocks and the deep pits that waited in the shadows. She wanted to turn back or cry out for her daughter, but Silas remained perfectly still. He watched the ears of his horse. Ghost turned his head slowly from side to side, his nostrils flaring as he tasted the cold air. Without a moment of doubt, the horse turned toward a narrow opening that was almost hidden by a wall of fallen timber. The terrain grew even more difficult. They had to climb steep slopes of loose gravel and slide down muddy banks that led toward the dark water of a hidden river. Every time Alawan thought they had reached a dead end, Ghost would find a way through. He moved with a confidence that felt supernatural. He did not stumble on the slick stones, and he did not shy away from the strange noises of the night. It was as if he could see a glowing trail that was invisible to everyone else. Hours passed, and the cold began to seep through Alawan's thick coat. She was exhausted, and her hope was starting to fade once again. She wondered if they were just wandering deeper into the heart of the mountain to die. But Silas never wavered. He told her that the horse's breathing had changed. Ghost was no longer just walking, he was searching. The muscles in the horse's neck were tight, and his head was held high. He was locked onto something that was calling to him from the deep silence of the stone. The air grew colder as they reached the deepest part of the canyon, where the rock walls were so high they blocked out the stars. Ghost suddenly stopped. He did not huff or neigh. He stood perfectly still, his muscles as hard as the stone beneath him. Silas held up a hand, signaling for Alawan to stay back. The buckskin horse began to lower his head until his velvet nose was almost touching the canyon floor. He stayed in that position for a long minute. His chest let out a low and steady vibration that sounded like a hum. Silas leaned over and whispered to Alawan that this was the secret. Ghost was not looking for a scent or a footprint. He was listening. The horse had learned that the mountain acted like a giant drum. Every heartbeat and every small movement sent a tiny ripple through the earth. Because Ghost had lived with wolves, he had developed a sense that most domestic horses had lost. He was feeling for the rhythm of life hidden deep within the cracks of the world. Ghost suddenly turned and began to paw at a thick wall of tangled vines and fallen rocks. To any human, it looked like a solid dead end. But as Silas climbed down and began to pull away the heavy branches, a small opening appeared. It was a hidden cave, tucked away behind a shelf of red stone. The horse pushed his head into the darkness and let out a soft, reassuring blow from his nostrils. Alawan rushed forward and peered into the narrow space. In the back of the small cavern, curled up on a bed of dry leaves, was her daughter. The girl was shivering but alive. She looked up with wide eyes and saw the gentle face of the buckskin horse looking back at her. The animal had found the one place in the entire mountain range where the search party had failed to look. He had tracked a heartbeat through miles of solid rock. As Alawan pulled her daughter into a desperate embrace, the girl began to sob, but not from fear. She pointed into the deep shadows at the very back of the narrow cave. Two glowing eyes reflected the light of Silas's lantern. A massive mountain wolf stood there, its silver fur thick and matted with forest debris. The mother gasped and pulled her child away, but Silas placed a firm, steady hand on her shoulder. He told her to look closer. The wolf did not growl or bare its teeth. Instead, it stepped forward and let out a low, mournful whine directed toward Ghost. The buckskin horse stepped into the cave and touched his nose to the wolf's forehead. The girl whispered that the wolf had found her when the mist came down. It had guided her to this dry spot and curled its heavy, warm body around her through the freezing night. It had protected her from the mountain lions and kept her heart beating until the horse arrived. The shocking truth was that Ghost had not been tracking a stranger. He had been tracking his own family. The wolf and the horse shared a bond of blood and survival that the townspeople would never understand. The sun began to rise as Silas, Alawan, and the young girl emerged from the canyon. The search party stood in stunned silence as the buckskin horse walked calmly into the camp. The sheriff stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had called the mountain a graveyard, yet here was the child, safe and warm. When the girl told the townspeople about the silver wolf that had guarded her, many shook their heads. They called it a miracle or a trick of the mind caused by the cold. But Alawan knew the truth. She watched as Silas mounted Ghost and turned back toward the high ridges. There was no need for a reward or a celebration. The horse had answered a call that only his wild heart could hear. As the pair disappeared into the morning mist, a single howl echoed from the peaks of Devil's Peak. The town would tell this story for generations, but they would never truly understand the secret bond that had saved a life that night.